very moment the young girl's voice cracked, her hands trembling as they wiped away streams of tears. Nathaniel Whitmore knew. That was it. He couldn't stand by and watch any longer. 5 years ago, after his father officially stepped down, Nathaniel had inherited a regional chain of upscale bakeries, 12 locations, steadily profitable and adored by loyal customers. It was a business built on quality, community, and legacy. But lately, something had shifted. The numbers might have still looked good on paper, but the soul of the company felt off. Employee turnover had surged. Complaints from customers trickled in steadily, like the ticking of a warning clock that no one seemed to hear. The neatly typed report still assured him everything was running smoothly, but his gut, an instinct honed through years of leadership and observation, told him a different story. And so, Nathaniel did something the board would surely label as reckless, maybe even foolish. He trimmed his normally polished hair, let a patchy beard grow, threw on a pair of thick glasses, and dressed like an aimless college graduate still searching for his first real job. Under a fake name, Nate Walker, and with a completely fabricated resume, he applied for a cashier position at one of the busiest locations, a store he had never once visited. From the ground up, he would start at zero. For the first 2 days, Nate kept his head down. He learned the register, interacted with customers, and studied every rhythm of the bakery, how it breathed, how it bent under pressure. What surprised him most was the people. Many of the staff were hard-working, passionate, and quietly proud of what they did. They cared about the pastries they made, about the regulars who came in with familiar smiles. Their dedication wasn't driven by paychecks or praise. It came from somewhere deeper, a sense of personal dignity, of doing things right. But like a fine wall painted over rot, the decay revealed itself when you got close enough, and that decay had a name, Denise. He had seen her name before, in HR reports, quarterly leadership assessments. On paper, she was one of their most efficient managers. She had been with the company for years, promoted from within. She looked like a poster child for internal growth, but in reality, she was a quiet storm, a force that never raised her voice, but still managed to shake people to their core. She barked out orders with a venom-laced calm, correcting minor mistakes like they were unforgivable offenses. She made others feel small, not with shouts, but with sharpened words and disdainful glances. Customers never saw it. They laughed while picking up their almond buttercream cakes. But behind the counter, the tension was thick, oppressive. And then, everything snapped on the 3rd afternoon. Haley, a young woman barely 22, was struggling at the register. The line was growing, customers growing restless. The air felt tight. Denise stormed over like a brewing thundercloud, voice low but slicing. "What is wrong with you? How many times do I have to tell you? This isn't rocket science," Haley stammered. I'm trying." Nathaniel stood just a few feet away, close enough to see Haley's hands tremble, close enough to see her chest rising with shallow, anxious breaths. She wasn't just fumbling. She was afraid. Terrified, even. The kind of fear that comes not from a bad day, but from being trapped in an environment where your self-worth is constantly eroded. "This is basic math," Denise snapped. "You've been here for months. You still haven't figured this out? Maybe I should replace you with someone who actually knows how to do the job." Haley bit her lip, hard. Her shoulders tightened as she turned away, wiping at her eyes as quickly as she could, like she was trying to erase the evidence of her own pain. But no one watching thought she was weak. Only Denise did. Only someone who had confused cruelty for competence. Nathaniel felt the heat rise inside him, his fists clenched at his sides, white-knuckled. He couldn't expose himself. Not yet. Not until he had the full picture. But he also couldn't just stand there. "She's trying her best," he said, voice level but firm. There was steel behind those 4 words. Denise spun around, her gaze narrowed and full of disdain. "Who the hell are you to say anything? You've been here, what, 3 days? Stay in your lane." Nathaniel didn't flinch. He held her gaze, steady and unyielding. The silence between them crackled, and then, from behind, Haley's voice came. Small, nearly inaudible. I just want to do a good job." She fled to the back room, her shoulders shaking. Denise scoffed, muttering under her breath, "Unbelievable." Nathaniel exhaled slowly. He had seen all he needed to see. Every doubt he had about this store, about the hidden rot in the company he inherited, was now a burning certainty. Denise wasn't a symptom. She was the disease. And the cruel irony? She had no idea that the man she just belittled like a nobody was the one holding the authority to end her reign. But Nathaniel didn't chase after Haley, not yet. He had to preserve his cover, at least for now. More importantly, he needed to see how the rest of the staff responded to her cruelty. The bakery slowly returned to its routine, but the energy had changed. Everything felt tighter, more muted. Employees moved faster, spoke less. They avoided Denise's gaze like it burned. No one talked about what had just happened, but it hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, like the smell of something scorched. Customers came and went, blissfully unaware of the storm just beneath the surface. Nathaniel kept working, kept ringing up orders, but his mind was racing. He had expected inefficiencies, maybe some outdated systems. But what he found was far worse: fear. And not fear of failure, but fear of humiliation. Fear of being seen as less than human for making a mistake. As the rush finally tapered off, Haley still hadn't returned. Nathaniel seized the moment and slipped into the break room. The small space was quiet, dim. She sat on a bench near the lockers, her hands clenched in her lap. Her eyes were red and swollen, but the tears had stopped. When she saw him, she straightened up quickly, alarmed, defensive, like a wounded bird cornered. Nathaniel didn't sit. He didn't want her to feel trapped. Instead, he leaned casually against the doorway and spoke softly. "Are you okay?" Haley gave a tiny nod, avoiding his eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine." It was a lie, a flimsy one they both recognized instantly, because sometimes the quietest words carry the loudest pain. Nathaniel exhaled, carefully choosing his words. "What happened back there? That wasn't okay. No one deserves to be treated like that." He let out a bitter, almost inaudible laugh. "It's fine. She's always like that." Her words struck like a knife, sharp, quiet, and devastating. It confirmed Nathaniel's deepest fear. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, a toxic model of behavior that had been left to grow unchecked for far too long. "How long have you worked here?" he asked gently. "Almost 6 months," Haley replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And has it always been like this?" She hesitated, then shrugged slightly. "Clark, it depends. If everything's going smoothly, she just ignores me. But if I mess up, or if we fall behind, then—" Haley stopped, shook her head, and forced a half-smile. "It's fine. I just need to do better." Nathaniel frowned, a weight settling in his chest. No employee should feel this way. Making mistakes is part of learning. Growth comes from failure, not from fear. No one should be made to believe that perfection is the price for being treated with basic decency. "You don't need to be better," he said, eyes steady on hers. "She needs to be better." Haley didn't reply immediately, but when she finally looked up at him, there was a flicker in her eyes, just a glimmer of hope. Fragile, tentative, the kind of hope that had been crushed too many times to be trusted easily. And yet, it was there. It told him everything. She wasn't alone, and knowing that was more powerful than any data point on a spreadsheet. "You shouldn't have to deal with this," Nathaniel said quietly. And I'm sure you're not the only one who feels this way, right? Haley paused again, then slowly shook her head. No, but no one ever does anything about it. No one ever does anything. Simple words, but filled with quiet despair. That was about to change. Before Nathaniel could respond, the door swung open. Denise stood there, arms crossed, eyes shifting sharply between the two of them. Breaks over, back to work. Her voice was cold and commanding. Nathaniel remained calm. I'll be out in a minute, he said evenly. Denise paused, her gaze narrowing suspiciously. Then she turned and left. When the door clicked shut behind her, Haley let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. I should get back out there, she whispered. Nathaniel nodded and stepped aside to let her pass. But inside, something had shifted. His resolve hardened. Things were going to change. Over the next 3 days, Nathaniel watched everything more closely than ever. What he saw was a culture crafted through control, intimidation, and perfectly timed facades. Denise continued to belittle staff, dismiss concerns, and demand perfection. But whenever a district manager showed up, she transformed into someone else, polished, composed, even charming. Minutes after they left, the mask dropped and the yelling resumed over trivial matters like a tart display being slightly off-center. It explained why none of the complaints ever reached headquarters. Denise was an expert at hiding the rot beneath the surface. Nathaniel decided it was time to test the boundaries. During the next lunch rush, he intentionally slowed down at the register. Just enough to draw her attention, not enough to raise alarms. And like clockwork, Denise swooped in, scolding him sharply in front of customers. He didn't react. He just stood there and let her dig her own hole. Once the rush passed, she pulled him aside. You need to move faster, she snapped. I don't have time to babysit someone who can't keep up. Nathaniel met her gaze, calm and unfazed. I'm still learning, she scoffed, and then learned faster. That was all the confirmation he needed. That evening, after the store closed, Nathaniel gathered the team in the break room. Some looked confused, others nervous. Haley stood near the back, arms crossed, eyes wary. Denise wasn't present. He had asked her to go home early under the pretense of additional cleaning duties. When the room had quieted, Nathaniel took a deep breath. He removed his glasses and ran a hand through his hair, allowing the disguise to fall away. Every eye turned to him. Silence stretched. Then Haley's voice broke through, soft and stunned. Oh my God. Nathaniel didn't waste time. I'm Nathaniel Whitmore, he said, his voice steady and warm. I'm the owner of this company. I came here undercover because I needed to see firsthand what's really happening inside our stores. A wave of shock passed through the room. Eyes widened. Some glanced at one another in disbelief. I've been here for over a week, he continued. I've seen how hard you work, how much you care about each customer, each pastry. But he'd also seen more than that. He'd seen young people forced to choose between their dignity and their paycheck. He'd seen good people working under a cloud of fear, clinging to jobs they once loved, silently enduring a kind of leadership that crushed more than it built. I've seen everything, Nathaniel said, his voice calm and firm. Not just how you serve customers, but how you're being treated. No one spoke, but in their eyes, he saw what words couldn't express. A cautious flicker of hope, a breath of relief too timid to exhale fully, as if someone had finally dared to acknowledge the truth they lived with every day. Haley was the first to break the silence. You really saw it all? Nathaniel nodded slowly. I did. A young employee near the front shook his head, his voice caught in his throat. We just thought no one would ever do anything. Nathaniel clenched his jaw. So many buried frustrations, so many voices forced into silence. No more. He looked directly at each face in the room, into eyes that had learned not to speak up. That changes. Starting now. He turned to face them fully, his tone steady but filled with conviction. Denise's behavior is unacceptable. No one should come to work afraid of how they'll be treated or wondering what they'll be humiliated for today. And I want to hear from you, not just about her, but about anything that's been ignored, dismissed, or quietly swept aside. For a moment, hesitation swept through the room like a cold draft. But then, slowly, one voice emerged. Then another. Stories began to spill out. Someone spoke about complaints that were never acknowledged. Another described shift schedules being used as punishment. Others shared how great coworkers had quit rather than endure the constant stress and fear. Nathaniel stood quietly, absorbing it all. Every word was a stone added to the weight already pressing on his chest. "I'm sorry," he said finally, not loud, but with sincere emotion. "This should never have been allowed to happen." Haley crossed her arms tightly, her voice quiet but cutting like a blade. "So, what happens now?" Nathaniel didn't flinch. He met her gaze squarely. "Denise will no longer be with this company." A collective exhale swept through the room. Some employees looked stunned. A few looked like they might cry. The rest simply stood still, as if for the first time in a long while they could finally breathe with their own lungs instead of borrowed air. "But the changes don't end with her," he continued. "I'm overhauling how the company handles complaints. We're creating a direct feedback channel to corporate leadership, one that cannot be hidden or filtered, and I will ensure that every manager is held accountable for how they treat their teams." People looked at one another. Their eyes held a mix of surprise and hope. "I know trust isn't earned by words alone," Nathaniel said. "It's earned by action. But I promise you, starting today, things will be different." For the first time since he had arrived at this store, Nathaniel felt a noticeable shift. Not a miracle, but a spark, a beam of light piercing a corner that had lived too long in shadow. And for the first time in many months, he felt like he finally understood the company he had inherited. The next morning, Nathaniel arrived early. He sat in the manager's office, silent, staring through the small window toward the rising sun. When Denise walked in, she froze. Her expression shifted from surprise to suspicion almost instantly. "You're not supposed to be in here," she said, setting her bag down with the air of authority she wore like a costume. Nathaniel sat up straighter, eyes locked on hers. "We need to talk." Denise crossed her arms, defensive. "About what?" Nathaniel reached into his bag and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were detailed statements from employees, time-stamped incidents he had witnessed himself, and an official termination notice. He placed it on the desk between them. "You're finished here," he said. For the first time, Denise's face faltered. A flicker of genuine unease crossed her features. "What?" she asked, voice low, eyes wide. Nathaniel's tone remained even, but it sliced like cold steel. "I've spent the past week working here. I've seen with my own eyes how you treat the staff. It's all documented. The work environment you've created is toxic. I won't allow it to continue." Denise glanced at the folder, but didn't open it. She lifted her chin and scoffed. "This is ridiculous. I've been here for years. You're going to fire me over a few complaints?" Nathaniel didn't blink. "It's not a few complaints. It's a repeated pattern of abuse, one that's driven good people away and left the rest working in fear." Denise's jaw clenched tight. "I run a strict operation. That's why this store performs so well." "This store succeeds in spite of you," Nathaniel said, his voice calm but unwavering. "Not because of you." The air in the room was thick, so heavy it felt like you could slice through it with a knife. Denise's voice was sharp and controlled, each word laced with disdain. "You think you understand everything just because you played cashier for a week? You have no idea. Running a store isn't that simple." Nathaniel leaned in slightly, his voice low but piercing. "Leadership isn't about control. It's about support. And what I saw here wasn't leadership at all." For the first time, Denise looked genuinely shaken. But the moment of uncertainty quickly morphed into defiance, her last stand. "Fine, fire me, but you'll regret it when everything falls apart without me." Nathaniel didn't respond. He simply stood, picked up the folder. "You'll receive your final paycheck by the end of the week. Security will escort you out." Denise gripped the strap of her bag tightly, her shoulders rigid. She said nothing more and walked out in silence. Nathaniel let out a long, heavy breath. He didn't feel triumphant, just resolute. This wasn't about pride. It was about doing what needed to be done. A responsibility he had ignored too long was finally being honored. A few hours later, he gathered the employees once more. But this time, the room wasn't filled with tension. It was quiet, gently, truly quiet. "Denise is no longer with the company," Nathaniel announced. His voice was calm but firm, effective immediately. The room held its breath. A few employees exchanged looks. Their expressions carried a mixture of relief and guarded caution. They had heard promises before, believed in them, only to be let down. They'd grown used to silence, to enduring, to waiting. But something in the way Nathaniel spoke this time made them listen. "As I said yesterday," he continued, scanning the room, "this isn't just about removing one person. This is about rebuilding from the ground up, a new culture where everyone feels respected, and that begins now." Nathaniel laid out his reform plan. An interim manager from another branch would be brought in, someone known for fairness and real leadership. Employee feedback channels would be improved to ensure issues reached top-level management, no longer getting lost or filtered out at middle levels. Then he looked each person in the eye. "I want to hear from you. What do you need to make your jobs easier? What's been missing all this time?" This time, there was no silence. Hands that once hesitated now rose with confidence. People spoke of being short-staffed during peak hours, of poor training, of unclear paths to promotion. Nathaniel listened carefully, jotting down every word. This wasn't just feedback. These were the missing pieces to a puzzle that had long since cracked. By the end of the meeting, something had shifted in the room. It wasn't full trust, not yet. But it was the beginning of something new, a chance, a promise, not made with words alone, but already backed by action. In the days that followed, the machinery of reform began turning. The interim manager arrived, bringing a completely different energy. Instead of commands, there was listening. Instead of fear, there was partnership. Employees began opening up. People who once avoided eye contact now offered suggestions. The suffocating tension that once filled the bakery started to lift, like steam dissipating from the oven after a fresh batch of pastries. Nathaniel didn't vanish after setting things in motion. He stayed, quietly, meeting with employees one-on-one, not to oversee but to understand, to truly listen. On his last day at the store, Haley approached him. Her face still carried the cautiousness of someone who had been let down before, but her voice was sincere. "I didn't believe it at first, that things would actually change," she said softly. "But it feels different now." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes warm. "It will be, and if it ever stops being different, if things ever go wrong again, I want you to speak up. You and everyone else." Haley studied him for a moment, then gave a small but meaningful nod. Agreement, not just in gesture, but in trust. When Nathaniel returned to corporate headquarters, his footsteps felt heavier, anchored. The once sterile white walls now echoed with the memories of the cashier counter. For the first time in years, he no longer saw the company through spreadsheets and projections. He saw it through people, through their fears, their exhaustion, and their quiet resilience. He walked into the executive boardroom where the leadership team was already gathered. The conversations quieted as he entered. They could sense something had changed. I just spent 2 weeks working as a cashier at one of our stores. Nathaniel began, walking to the head of the table. And I saw firsthand things I should have known long ago. The room fell still. Some exchanged glances. Others leaned in, their eyes wary. Lauren, the chief operating officer, leaned forward slightly. "What did you find?" Nathaniel placed a familiar folder on the table, the very one that ended Denise's career. A work environment ruled by fear, employees afraid to speak up, turnover that isn't just a number, it's the result of a culture we've allowed to rot from within. Mark, the head of HR, frowned. "We've always had an open-door policy. If something serious happened, it should have been reported." Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. Reported to who? Managers who only see what they want to see? HR reps who read polished reports that never reflect reality? Policies mean nothing if employees don't feel safe using them. Silence fell again, this time heavier, but inside that silence was a beginning. No one said a word. Nathaniel's voice wasn't loud, but it struck directly at the heart of the matter. Lauren sighed and nodded slightly. "Say, what do you want to do?" Nathaniel glanced around the room before speaking with clarity and conviction. "I want to completely overhaul how internal feedback is handled. We need a direct reporting line to the executive team, no middle layers, no filters." He turned to Mark. "I also want to implement anonymous reporting. No one should be afraid of retaliation for telling the truth." Mark hesitated for a second, then nodded. "We can make that happen." Nathaniel continued. "We're going to reevaluate our entire management team, every single person, based not on sales numbers, but on real employee feedback. If there's a pattern of abuse, we address it. We don't bury it." Lauren tapped her pen against her notebook. "That's going to lead to a lot of manager turnover." Nathaniel didn't flinch. "Good. I'd rather lose a few bad managers than lose great employees." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the room. "And it's not just new hire training," Nathaniel added. "We need leadership training at every level. Too many managers were promoted based on metrics, not their ability to lead. That ends today." Daniel, the head of operations, finally spoke. "This is a major overhaul. It's going to take time." "Time, I know," Nathaniel said, "but it starts today." No one argued. After the meeting, Lauren caught up with Nathaniel in the hallway. She paused, studying him. "You've changed. This experience, it changed you." Nathaniel nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "It reminded me why I started. This company is not just about profit, it's about people, and I won't let them be treated as anything less. Ever again." Lauren nodded back, her expression softening with understanding. "Then let's get to work." And from that moment on, real change began, not with grand gestures, but with quiet, intentional steps, fueled by determination. The early changes didn't come with spotlights or applause. They came quietly, like morning light slipping through a curtain, gentle but unstoppable. At the bakery where it all started, the atmosphere had shifted. The same people, the same old ovens filling the store each morning with the scent of butter and flour. But something had softened. The stiffness in people's eyes and movements began to melt away. Haley smiled more easily. Quiet laughter and tentative jokes returned to the break room. Something that once felt so simple, relief, was now a powerful sign of a healthier workplace culture. The new manager didn't arrive like a hero. He came to listen. He walked the store, jotting down ideas, concerns, suggestions. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people knew they were truly heard. Meanwhile, Nathaniel returned to corporate, but not in the way he once had. He wasn't just the CEO behind the glass walls, flipping through reports and watching colorful charts. He walked through every department, from HR to training to the warehouse. He asked simple questions, like, "How's your work been feeling lately?" And he stayed long enough to hear the real answers. A week after that first leadership meeting, Nathaniel called together every regional manager for a private session. No slides, no presentations, just him and a single folder filled with handwritten notes from his time in the field. "I used to think good policies were enough," he said, voice steady. "But I was wrong. Culture isn't defined by documents. It's shaped, day after day, by how managers treat their teams." One manager raised a hand. "What if some of us don't agree with this direction?" Nathaniel didn't dodge the question. "Then you have a choice. But staying means you commit to this new culture, one where people come first." Silence filled the room, not a silence of resistance, but one of realization. A chapter was closing. Those who clung to the old ways would be left behind. Across other stores in the system, the wave of change spread. Anonymous surveys were sent out. Employees began sharing their stories. Some were hard to read, stories of mistreatment and burnout, but alongside them came ideas, suggestions, dreams that had once been buried under silence. Nathaniel expanded leadership training programs, not focused on KPIs and numbers, but on listening, dialogue, and leading through trust, not fear. Some left, unable or unwilling to grow into the new vision, but the company didn't falter. It got stronger, like a tree that sheds dead branches to grow new, healthier ones. A few months later, on a rainy afternoon, Nathaniel returned to the store where it had all begun. No announcement, no fanfare. Just a quiet visit. Haley spotted him through the break room mirror and smiled. "I thought maybe you'd forgotten about us." Nathaniel smiled gently. "Not a chance. This place reminded me why I started in the first place." They stood there for a moment, no words needed. The bakery now hummed with the sounds of life, ovens whirring, customers laughing, team members asking each other if they needed help. There were no more shadows of fear. Before leaving that day, Nathaniel scribbled a note by hand and pinned it to the employee bulletin board. "A good workplace isn't one without problems. It's one where people have the courage to speak up and the support to solve them together. Thank you for your courage. This journey is only just beginning." And it truly was just beginning. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Moments of Quiet Truth, where we believe that the human spirit is never truly defeated, only waiting to rise.